Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. About the permissibility of fasting during a travel. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, during Ramadan the Prophet travelled to Mecca to conquer the city. Until they reached a place called Qura' al-Ghamim, he ordered a cup of water and he raised it up, and the people saw him raise this cup up and he drank from it. And then afterwards he was told that some people have continued on fasting, and the Prophet said about them, أُولَٰئِكَ الْعُصَاةُ أُولَٰئِكَ الْعُصَاةُ. They are the disobedient ones, they are the disobedient ones. So we find that it is permissible to fast during a travel, even if it is in Ramadan. But if it becomes difficult upon you to fast, then you must break your fast, because this is unnecessary difficulty you're bringing upon yourself. Likewise, the Prophet said authentically, لَيْسَ مِنَ الْبِرِّ الصِّيَامُ فِي السَّفَرِ, that it is not from righteousness that you should fast during the travel. But this is the type of fast which would cause you great harm and difficulty. However, if you are able to fast during the travel without any difficulty, then if it is in Ramadan, it is better to fast, because it is better to fast during Ramadan rather than outside Ramadan, even though you have the permission to break the fast. Also, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reports that we would travel with the Prophet, and from us were those who were fasting, and from us were those who were not fasting, and no one blamed each other. So this tells us then that you can fast or you cannot fast, you have the choice. What is better for you to do? We say the easiest choice is the better one. If it's easier for you not to fast, then don't fast. If it's easier for you to fast, then fast. If it is both equal, then it is better to fast during the month of Ramadan rather than outside the month. And it is also quicker in fulfilling your obligation as well. Hadith number 16. The one not fasting in a travel would have more reward if he does beneficial actions during the travel. From Anas ibn Malik, he says the Prophet and the companions were on a travel. Some were fasting, some were not fasting. So as for the muftirun, those who were not fasting, they had the will and determination to work and serve the other people. But those who were fasting were too weak to do so, and the Prophet said, ذَهَبَ الْمُفْثِرُونَ الْيَوْمَ بِالْأَجْرِ. Those who are not fasting have taken away all the reward today. Why? Because they were serving the rest of the community, whereas the people fasting were not able to serve the rest of the community by working. So the point is that if you're able to serve others on a journey, then this would be better for you to do and more virtuous than fasting. Also in the chapter, when the Prophet and the companions were traveling to Mecca to conquer it, they rested at a place, and the Prophet said, إِنَّكُمْ قَدْ دَنَوْتُمْ مِنْ عَدُوِّكُمْ وَالْفِطْرُ أَقْوَى لَكُمْ. Verily, you have approached your enemy, and breaking your fast would be better for you in that it would give you more strength. But even after that, some still remained fasting. Then after that, they settled in another place, and the Prophet said, إِنَّكُمْ مُصَبِّحُوا عَدُوِّكُمْ وَالْفِطْرُ أَقْوَى لَكُمْ فَأَفْطِرُوا. You're going to attack your enemy by morning time, and breaking your fast would give you more strength, so break your fast. And so the second time round, it was a firm order. And the narrator Abu Sa'id al-Khudri says that we broke the fast. We take from this hadith that you're allowed to break your fast when you're fighting the enemy. And this has got nothing to do with the travel, by the way. The Prophet did not tell them to break their fast because they're on a travel. Rather, it is because of the fighting. So even if you're fighting your enemy in your own hometown, you are allowed to break your fast. And this is what Ibn Taymiyyah did when he fought the Tatar army, or the Tartars. And this hadith therefore shows us that fighting in the way of Allah and fasting at the same time is not recommended, because you need all your strength when you're fighting. Also in the chapter from Hamza ibn Amr al-Aslami, he asked the Prophet that I am strong enough to fast during the travel, so is there any sin upon me? And the Prophet replied, هي رخصة من الله فمن أخذ بها فحسن وَمَنْ أَحَبَّ أَنْ يَصُومَ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ. This is a permission from Allah, meaning to break your fast during a travel. So whoever takes it, then this is good. But whoever loves to fast during the travel, then there is no sin upon him. So this is a clear hadith then, that you have a choice to fast or break your fast during a travel. We said that the better option is that which is easier for you. Also from Abu Darda, he says, we traveled with the Prophet during the month of Ramadan in severe heat, such that one of us would put his hand on his head because of the severity of the heat, and none amongst us was fasting except the Prophet and Abdullah ibn Rawaha. So again, showing us then that You have a choice during the journey whether to fast or break your fast. The Zahiriyya madhab says that you absolutely must break your fast during a journey, because Allah says about the journey, فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, some fasting from other days when you are on a journey. So they say you absolutely must break your fast, but we find from the narrations that you do have the option. Hadith number 17. For the one standing at Arafah, it is better for him to break the fast. From al-Fadl bint al-Harith, some people were disputing on the day of Yawm Arafah about the fast of the Prophet. Some were saying he is fasting, and others were saying no, he's not fasting. So she says that she sent to the Prophet a cup of milk whilst he was sitting on his camel at Arafah, and the Prophet drank from it. So this lady, al-Fadl, who is the mother of Abdullah ibn Abbas, had the intelligence to put an end to this argument where she sent a cup of milk to the Prophet on Yawm Arafah and the Prophet drank from it, clearly showing us and them at that time that the Prophet was not fasting on Yawm Arafah. We say it is better not to fast on Yawm Arafah to conserve your energy and strength for the dua, because if you're fasting you could feel weak and tired and you just want to go to sleep, and you would not feel encouraged or motivated to make dua and to really exert yourself in making dua and dhikr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Therefore we say don't fast on this day. If you do fast, you're not sinful, but it is better for you not to fast, just from a rational standpoint of view. And besides, we know from this narration the Prophet was not fasting on Yawm Arafah. There is a narration which absolutely prohibits fasting at Arafah, but it is weak. So we cannot say that fasting on Yawm Arafah is haram because of a lack of authentic narration. Yes, it is true, fasting the day of Arafah expiates 2 years of your sins, but the majority of the scholars say that this applies to the one who is not at Arafah. We can also take from this narration that you're permitted to accept a gift from a non-mahram woman who is married, as long as she is trustworthy in her deen and there are no haram intentions. We also learn that a woman can do with her wealth as she pleases without the permission of her husband, unless she is a type of woman who does not know how to spend her wealth properly, in which case she needs to ask permission of the husband, lest she should squander her wealth. Hadith number 18. Fasting the Yawm Ashura. From Aisha, she says the Quraysh would fast Yawm Ashura in the Jahiliyyah, and the Prophet would also fast it. When he made hijrah to Al-Madinah, he fasted it and he ordered that it should be fasted, meaning Yawm Ashura. When the Ramadan became obligatory, however, the Prophet said to his people, "Man sha'a samahu wa man sha'a tarakah." Whoever wants to can fast it, and whoever wants to can leave it. So what we find from this narration is that Yawm Ashura was fasted even by the people of Jahiliyyah before the Prophet made hijrah. The Prophet would also fast it. At the beginning of his time in Al-Madinah, he ordered Yawm Ashura to be fasted. And also in the narration we find that when the Prophet came to Al-Madinah, he found the Yahud there fasting Yawm Ashura. He asked them about this, and he says this was the day where Musa alayhi and the Banu Israel were victorious over Fir'aun, and so we fast this day as a ta'zeem, as a veneration. So the Prophet told them, "Nahnu awla bi Musa minkum." We are closer or more worthy to be companions of Musa than you. So he ordered his people to fast it as well. Is the Prophet imitating the Yahud here? Well, no, because the reason for him fasting this day was not because the Yahud were fasting it, but rather it was because of a Shar'i reason, which is that Allah Jalla wa Ala saved Musa alayhi salam. So it's not because the Yahud are fasting it, but rather it's because of the salvation of Musa alayhi salam and his people. But he did seek to differ from them, where we find in the narration, the Prophet said, فَإِذَا كَانَ الْعَامُ الْمُقْبِلِ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صُمْنَا الْيَوْمَ التَّاسِعِ. The next year, inshallah, we will fast the 9th day as well. So the 9th and the 10th, as opposed to just the 10th, and this would be in order to be different from the Yahud. So we say if you're going to fast the Yawm Ashura, then fast also the 9th as well, the 9th and 10th. This would be the better way. By way of analogy, you could say that if you miss the 9th, then you could do the 10th and 11th, and this would also be imitating the Yahud. Otherwise, the text tells us the 9th and the 10th. Also, from Salama ibn al-Aqwa, the Prophet sent a man from the tribe of Aslam on the Yawm Ashura, and he sent him to announce to the people the following message: من كان لم يصم فليصم ومن كان أكل فليتم صيامه إلى الليل. Whoever has not eaten anything yet, then let him fast, but whoever has eaten something, then let him spend the rest of the day up until the night in fasting. This narration illustrates a very important point. What happens when during the day you realize that today is a fasting day, as what happened with these people on Yawm Ashura, which is why the Prophet had to send someone to deliver the message? Well, the answer is that you spend the rest of the day fasting, and there is no sin upon you because you did not know. But do you have to make up for that day? So if it was a Ramadan day, would you have to make up for it? Well, the stronger opinion here is no, you do not, because you did what you were ordered to do. You did that which is to the best of your ability. Some other scholars said that you do have to make it up because you did not have the intention to fast at Fajr time. That's the crucial point at which you need to have your intention, because that's when the fast begins. However, Ibn Taymiyyah says no, your intention follows your knowledge, so you cannot have the intention without the knowledge. And because you did not have the knowledge, you could not have had the intention. So you made your intention at the time when you had the knowledge. This could be halfway through the day, for example. So you did all that which was necessary for you to do. You made your intention after the knowledge. And so if you did that which is necessary for you to do, then there's nothing else left for you to do. Hence, you do not need to make up for that day. Some other scholars said that you simply make up for that day, but you don't need to spend the rest of this current day in the fasting. And this would be a weaker opinion, because if you know that today is the day of Ramadan, how could you spend this day eating without a valid excuse? So we say you simply spend the rest of the day fasting and there's nothing for you to make up. It's the same if a kafir converts to Islam during the daytime of Ramadan. He has to spend the rest of the day fasting, but he does not have to make up anything. Or for example, if a child reaches the age of maturity, he has to spend the rest of the day fasting and nothing for him to make up. Or for example, if an insane person becomes sane, again, he just spends the rest of the day fasting and nothing to make up. Sure, one could say, but I'll make it up just to be on the safe side. And we would not really argue against that. If he wants to be on the safe side, no problem. However, if somebody does not make up for it, then we would say you are not doing anything wrong. Also in the chapter, there is a narration in which we learn that the Sahaba would even train their children to fast. And it says that when the children would ask them for food, they would simply give them some toys made of wool to preoccupy them and make them forget their hunger until the iftar time. So there's no problem in training the children to fast and to pray and to perform the obligatory actions, even though it is not obligatory upon them. But this is just a training session for them. And there's nothing wrong with children fasting as long as it will not harm them. Hadith number 19, prohibition of fasting the 2 days of Eid. From Abu Hurairah, he says, the Prophet forbade fasting on the 2 days of Eid, Yawm al-Fitr and Yawm al-Adha. Likewise, in the same chapter, the Prophet said, لا يصلح الصيام في يومين يوم الأضحى ويوم الفطر من رمضان. Fasting is not righteous, is not fitting in 2 days, Yawm al-Adha and Yawm al-Fitr from Ramadan. Fitr meaning breaking the fast. Also, from Nubaysha al-Hudhali, that the Prophet said, أيام التشريق أيام أكل وشرب. The days of Tashriq are the days of eating and drinking. So we find from these narrations that the day of Eid al-Fitr and Adha are not allowed to be fasted. Likewise, the days of Tashriq are not allowed to be fasted. They are days of eating and drinking. Aisha reports that fasting the days of Tashriq was not allowed for anyone except for the one performing the Hajj who has not found a hadi to sacrifice. So he has to perform a kafara of fasting during the Hajj 3 days, and these 3 days could be done on the days of Tashriq, 11th, 12th and 13th. Anyone fasting on the days of Eid then is committing a sin and his fast is not valid. He's just going hungry for no reward. There is a difference of opinion if someone takes a vow to fast on a Yawm al-Eid. He has taken a vow to do something haram. Now there's a difference of opinion. If somebody takes a vow to do something haram, does it carry a kafara or not? Most scholars say no, it doesn't. Some scholars say yes, it does. So that depends on what opinion you're following there. Hadith number 20. About fasting on Yawm al-Jum'ah. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا تصم أحدكم يوم الجمعة منفردا إلا أن يصوم قبله أو يصوم بعده. One of you should not fast the Yawm al-Jum'ah on its own unless he fasts a day before it or a day after it. And also from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا تخص ليلة الجمعة بقيام من بين الليالي ولا تخص يوم الجمعة بصيام من بين الأيام إلا أن يكون في صوم يصومه أحدكم. Do not specify the night of Jum'ah for standing up in prayer amongst the other nights, and do not specify the day of Jum'ah for fasting amongst the other days, except it be that it coincides with a fast which one of you is normally fasting. So the prohibition here is to just fast solely on Yawm al-Jum'ah. It is permissible to fast on Yawm al-Jum'ah if you combine it with a day before or a day after. So Thursday and Friday, or you could do Friday and Saturday. That is permissible. And of course we're talking about the Nawafil fasts here. And from this hadith then we also learn that you are allowed to fast the Yawm al-Sabt, the Saturday. And as for the hadith which prohibits this, then if we say that this hadith is authentic, then we will carry it to mean that you do not specify the Saturday for fasting. So you don't just fast Saturday solely. Rather, if you combine it with Friday, then this is permissible and not makruh. So actually we could come up with a riddle. We could say you do an action which is makruh and add it to another action which is makruh, and it becomes permissible. Normally somebody might think a makruh plus a makruh should be an even greater makruh. But the answer to the riddle will be that if you combine fasting of Friday to a fasting Saturday, then this becomes permissible, whereas individually this would be makruh. Hadith 21. From Salamat ibn al-Akwa, he says that when the ayah came down, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ, and as for those who are able to fast but don't want to, then they have to feed a poor person. He says that in the beginning, whoever did not want to fast had the choice. He didn't have to fast, but the alternative was that he had to pay the fidyah, which is to feed a poor person, until Allah sent down the ayah after this ayah and it abrogated it. And he's talking about ayah 185, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. Up until the end of the ayah. The month of Ramadan, in which the Quran was sent down as a guide for man and evidences from the guidance and the criterion. So whoever witnesses the month, then let him fast it. So this ayah gives a clear order that you must fast it, and there is no choice. And so this ayah then abrogates ayah 148, which gives you a choice. Now, in a clever fashion, Ibn Abbas used the abrogated ayah, giving a choice for the fidyah, to say that the old person, or the one who is not going to recover from an illness, he gives the fidyah instead of fasting, because that person is unable to fast. And the reason is because in the abrogated ayah, Allah gave a choice to the one who did not want to fast. He had a choice to give the fidyah. That was the alternative. Now, currently, the fasting is obligatory. However, there are still some people who are unable to fast, like the elderly. So if they are not able to fast, then we have the alternative, which is to give the poor person food to eat for every day you are not fasting. So he says that this alternative, or the badal, still is in existence today, but it only applies to the one who is unable to fast and will not recover from his condition. And from this narration there is evidence that yes, abrogation can happen in the Sharia, both in the Quran and Hadith. It was necessary to gradually introduce the ahkam of the Sharia in the beginning of Islam, because if you made it too harsh at the beginning, then people would feel averse to this deen. If people feel averse, then Islam simply would not get off the ground and simply would not be able to take root. So in other words, the beginning of Islam, that was a sensitive time. Nowadays, we see that Islam has firmly taken root in many countries. There is a zero possibility that it could be destroyed. The situation is not quite as precarious as it was during the early days of Islam. So now there is no need to abrogate anything, because there is no chance of Islam being destroyed or being abandoned by everybody in the world. And also in the Sahih, Aisha radiallahu anha says that in the beginning, teachings about Tawheed and Jannah and Jahannam came down, and that was really emphasized. She says that if the order was straight away not to commit zina or not to drink khamr, people would say, no, we will never leave off zina, or no, we will never leave off drinking khamr. So we find that during the early days of Islam, it was a sensitive time, and the Sharia had to be carefully and systematically introduced to the people and developed. Hadith 22, about making up for the Ramadan fasts. Aisha reports that there used to be some fasting left to be performed from the previous Ramadan, and I was not able to make up for those until Sha'ban the next year because of the rights of the Prophet over her. We find from this narration that when you have to make up fasts of Ramadan, then it is a flexible issue. You do not have to do it straight away, and that you can leave it to just before the next Ramadan, but you must not leave it till after the next Ramadan. That would be like leaving your prayer of Dhuhr until after the Asr time. Of course, that's not permissible. You have to do it before the next prayer. So likewise, your fasting, you need to make it up before the next Ramadan. But we always say it is better to make up for these Ramadan fasting as quick as possible. Is it permissible to fast Nawafil fasts before the Ramadan fasting when you have to make up for it? The answer is yes, except for the Shawwal. The 6 fasting days of Shawwal must be after the Ramadan has been completed. They're not allowed to be before. And the reason for that is because we have a specific text to this effect, that you only reap the reward of fasting for the whole of the time when you follow the 6 of Sha'ban after the Ramadan. Hadith number 23, making up the fasting of a dead person. From Aisha, the Prophet said, Man mata wa alayhi siyamun sama anhu waliyu. Whoever dies owing some fasts, then his inheritor will fast on his behalf. This order is by way of recommendation. It cannot be by way of obligation, simply because no one will bear the burden of another. We might even argue that this order is by way of denoting permissibility, not even recommendation. And this could be the case. The Prophet could give an order to do something to show that it is permissible to do it, because people may be thinking previously that it is impermissible. So if the Prophet gives an order to do something which you were thinking is impermissible, then it denotes permissibility. It does not have to denote recommendation nor obligation. Some scholars said that this hadith refers specifically to the fasting of the vow which you make. But we say no, this hadith refers to all types of fasting, including Ramadan. In fact, it has to refer to the Ramadan first and foremost, because this is the type of fasting which a dead person could have upon him. Otherwise, the fasting pertaining to the nadhr or the vow fasting, they are rare. But Ramadan fasting happens every year. It also proves to us that physical actions of ibadah, or the ibadah which involves the body or physical actions, they can be performed on behalf of the deceased. And it's not just monetary acts of ibadah which can be performed, because some scholars made that distinction, that the monetary acts of ibadah can be performed on behalf of the deceased, but not the physical ones. But this hadith refutes their point. So in the same way then, reciting the Quran for the deceased is permissible. So all of these acts of ibadah, though they are permissible to be performed on behalf of the deceased, we say it is better not to, because what the Prophet ordered us to do is to make dua for the deceased. This hadith talks about the wali, which means the inheritor in this case. Is it specific to the inheritor? The answer is no. Even if you're a friend of someone who's not going to inherit and your friend dies, you can fast on his behalf, no problem. If a person has, let's say, 5 days of fasting to make up for the Ramadan fast, and he has 5 children, and each of those children fasts the same day, so this would suffice, because 5 different people have fasted on behalf of the deceased. Even though it is on the same day, it will suffice, because what's important here is that 5 fasts have been performed, as opposed to if he has a kafara to be performed, let us say fasting 2 consecutive months. Now here, 5 children fasting 1 day will not count as 5 fasts. It will only count as 1 fast, because the kafara is to fast 2 consecutive months. So that would be about 60 continuous days. So this is what must be done. So 5 people now fasting on the same day will only count as 1 fast, because the consecutiveness is important here. Whereas it is not important when you make up for the Ramadan fasting. So notice this crucial difference. Also in the chapter, from Ibn Abbas, he says, a man came to the Prophet and he says, O Messenger of Allah, my mother died and she had a month of fasting upon her. Should I make it up on her behalf, and the Prophet asked him, لو كان على أمك دين أكنت قاضيه عنها? If your mother had a debt, would you not pay it on her behalf? He said yes. So the Prophet said, فَدَيْنُ اللَّهِ أَحَقُّ أَن يُقْضَى. Then the debt of Allah is more worthy to be paid off. So from this we find that you are allowed to make qiyas or analogy in the deen, in refutation to those who say that you're not allowed to make analogy. In another narration, it is a woman who comes up and says to the Prophet that her mother died and she has a fast to be made up for. It appears the wording of the man is shadh, and that it was a woman who asked the Prophet. But in any case, this difference of wording does not actually harm the hadith because it does not affect the ruling of the hadith. So we do not adjudge this hadith to be muttarib. In another narration, a woman comes up and she says that her mother died and she had a fasting of nadhr, a vow fasting upon her. Should she make up for it? And the Prophet gave the similar reply, that if your mother died and she had a debt, would you make up for it? Meaning pay the debt off. She said yes. So the Prophet says that you then pay off the debt which she owes to Allah. Now just because this narration specifically mentions the fasting of the Sawm does not mean it's a takhsis, it's a specification. Rather, the ruling includes the fasting of the nadhr and also fasting of Ramadan and any other fasting as well, of kafara and so on. Because the hadith prior to this, about the wali fasting on the deceased's behalf, is general. So if another narration comes which agrees with the generality of the general hadith, then this is not a takhsis. A takhsis would be if a hadith comes and disagrees with the generality of the hadith. So it takes out certain members of the generality. That would be a takhsis. Hadith 24. If a fasting person is invited to eat some food. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, إِذَا دُعِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى طَعَامٍ وَهُوَ صَائِمٌ فَلْيَقُلْ إِنِّي صَائِمٌ. If one of you is invited to some food when he is fasting, then let him say, I am fasting. So this hadith tells you that you are allowed to seek permission not to attend the invitation if you are fasting, and you just make it known to the host that you are fasting. If he allows you not to attend, then this is fine, but if he persists and he really does want you to attend, then you can attend, but you don't have to eat the food. In this case, you could make yourself useful by serving the food to others instead of eating it yourself. Of course, nowadays people give advance notice with invitation cards and so on, telling you that there will be a walima on a certain day. Of course, you will make sure that you're not fasting on that day, because you really have to attend the walima and eat from the food. Otherwise, people could take offense. And if this is a wajib fast which you are performing and you are on that day invited to food, then you are simply not allowed to break that fast. Yes, you can attend the invitation but not eat. As for if it is a nafila fasting, then of course you can break this fast and you will not be sinful. But should you break the fast or not? Well, this depends. If the host who has invited you would feel offended that you're not eating, then it is better, for the sake of unity and love between the brothers, that you break your fast and eat from the food, because you're not committing a sin in breaking this nafila fast. As for if the host won't really care, then it is better for you not to break the fast, because if you've started the act of ibadah, you ought not to break it. And so that would be the best option to take. So a nafila fasting, should you break it or not? Well, you need to ask yourself, what impact would it have on the host? As for if this fasting of yours is a wajib fasting, then it makes no difference as to how the host will react. You are not allowed to break the wajib fast because the rights of Allah supersede the sensibilities of any person. Just a few more points of benefit. The pregnant and the breastfeeding woman does not have to fast, and we have a text in the Sunan for this authentically. Also, it matters not why she is not fasting, whether she fears for herself or her child, according to the weightier opinion, and also if she breaks the fast because of breastfeeding, she does not need to pay any fidya, even if she broke it because of the child, according to the weightier opinion, because there is no evidence that she has to pay any fidya. Also, if you delay making up the Ramadan fast up until the next Ramadan, majority of the scholars say you have to pay a fidya in addition to making up the fast. But according to the weightier opinion, you do not need to make any fidya due to the absence of any compelling evidence. Okay, let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1.
Explain whether it is better to fast or not during a travel. Question number 2. If a person dies having 5 fasts on him, then can 5 of his children fast the same day? And explain why it would be different for a kafara of fasting for 2 consecutive months. Question number 3. If you are fasting and are invited to a meal, then explain the best course of action in both scenarios. Scenario number 1, that you're fasting a wajib fast, and scenario number 2, that you're fasting a nafila fast.